Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. Look, I know how this sounds when I tell people about it, but I swear on everything I hold dear that this actually happened to me. I'm Emily, and I was 21 when this went down, just finishing up my junior year at State. I was working part-time at a local coffee shop while juggling classes, so money was always tight. My apartment was this tiny studio about 15 minutes from campus, and honestly, I loved the independence even if it meant surviving on ramen and whatever was on sale at Walmart. The whole experience changed how I see parking lots at night, and I still get this weird feeling in my chest when I think about what could have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts that evening. My roommate always said I was too trusting, too willing to help strangers, but after what happened that Tuesday night in October, I learned there's a difference between being kind and being naive. That particular evening started like any other weeknight. I had just finished a brutal 3-hour study session for my psychology midterm, and my brain felt like mush. My fridge was basically empty, except for some expired milk and half a sandwich that looked questionable, so I grabbed my keys and headed to the Walmart about 10 minutes from my place. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I got there, and the parking lot was moderately busy but not packed. I remember parking closer to the back because I didn't want to deal with the crowds near the entrance. Plus, I figured the walk would do me good after sitting hunched over textbooks all day. The store was bright and bustling with the usual mix of college students, families, and night shift workers grabbing essentials. I had my earbuds in, listening to some indie playlist while I wandered the aisles, picking up basics like bread, peanut butter, some frozen dinners, and a few other necessities that would get me through the week. The shopping trip was completely normal and uneventful. I spent maybe 45 minutes inside, took my time comparing prices because every dollar mattered on my budget, and even treated myself to a small bag of those chocolate chip cookies I'd been craving all week. The cashier was this older woman named Dolores who always worked the night shift, and we made small talk about the upcoming Halloween decorations they were putting up around the store. She mentioned how busy they'd been lately with college kids doing their weekly runs, and I laughed because I was definitely part of that crowd. After paying, I grabbed my 3 plastic bags and headed toward the exit, checking my phone to see a text from my study group about meeting up tomorrow. The automatic doors slid open with that familiar whoosh sound, and I stepped out into the cool October air, immediately noticing how much quieter and darker it had gotten while I was inside. Walking across the parking lot, I had this moment of appreciating how peaceful everything felt. The temperature had dropped just enough to make it comfortable, and there was this nice breeze that made me glad I'd worn my favorite oversized sweatshirt. My car was parked in the 3rd row back under one of those tall light poles that cast these long shadows between the vehicles. I was about halfway to my car, maybe 30 feet away, when I heard this voice call out from somewhere behind me and to my left. "Excuse me, miss?" The voice was male, kind of gravelly, and when I turned around I saw this guy in a dark hoodie standing next to a black SUV with the back hatch open. He was maybe in his 30s, average height, and he had his hands stuffed in his pockets as he looked in my direction. "Sorry to bother you, but could you help me load this box? It's pretty heavy and I threw out my back at work today." He gestured toward the open back of his SUV, and I could see what looked like a large cardboard box sitting on the ground next to the vehicle. Now, normally I'm the type of person who tries to help when someone asks, but something about this whole situation made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way he was standing so far from his car, or how the box looked perfectly manageable for one person, or just the general vibe of being approached by a stranger in a dark parking lot. I shifted my grocery bags to one arm and called back, "Sorry, I'm really in a hurry tonight," without breaking my stride toward my car. I kept walking, but I could feel him watching me, and when I glanced back he was still standing there in the same spot, not moving toward his box or doing anything that suggested he actually needed help. The whole interaction felt rehearsed somehow, like he'd practiced that exact line before. My pace picked up slightly, and I started fishing in my purse for my car keys with my free hand. suddenly very aware of how isolated this section of the parking lot was compared to the busier area near the store entrance. I had just reached my car and was fumbling with the unlock button on my key fob when I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. Before I could turn around completely, this voice right next to my ear said, "Come on, it'll just take a second." But here's the thing that made my heart start racing. This was a completely different voice from the hoodie guy. This voice was younger, smoother, and way too close to me. I spun around and there was this second man, probably mid-20s, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a dark jacket. He had positioned himself between me and the driver's side door of my car, and his presence felt immediately threatening in a way that made every alarm bell in my head start going off. The hoodie guy was now walking toward us from across the parking lot, no longer pretending to struggle with his box, and I realized with growing panic that I was about to be trapped between two men who had clearly been working together from the start. "I said I'm in a hurry," I said louder this time, trying to sound firm while my mind raced through my options. The baseball cap guy took a step closer and reached out like he was going to touch my arm, saying something about how they really needed the help, and it would only take a minute. That's when pure instinct kicked in, and I jerked away from him, clutching my grocery bags against my chest like they were some kind of shield. I could see the hoodie guy getting closer, maybe 20 feet away now, and the way they were both moving felt coordinated, like they'd done this before. The baseball cap guy's whole demeanor had shifted from fake friendly to something much more aggressive, and when he reached for my arm again, this time with more force, I knew without a doubt that helping with a box was never what this was about. Every self-defense class I'd ever heard about flashed through my mind, and I remembered the most important rule: make noise, make a scene, don't let them take you anywhere. The next few seconds felt like they happened in slow motion, and at lightning speed all at once. Baseball cap guy let go of my sweatshirt, and both men started moving quickly toward their SUV, which I now realized was parked strategically close to where I'd ended up walking. I managed to get my car door open and threw myself inside, immediately hitting the lock button and starting the engine with shaking fingers. Through my windshield, I watched them jump into the black SUV, hoodie guy in the driver's seat, baseball cap guy in the passenger side, and I could see them having what looked like an intense, hurried conversation. My car horn was still blaring from the panic button, and I could see more people coming out of the store now, including what looked like a security guard in a bright yellow vest. The SUV's engine roared to life, and for a terrifying moment I thought they were going to ram my car or try to block me in, but instead they peeled out of the parking space and sped toward the exit. I sat there in my locked car, engine running, watching their taillights disappear onto the main road while my heart hammered against my ribs. I called 911 right there in the parking lot, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had just happened. The dispatcher was incredibly calm and professional, asking me detailed questions about the men's appearances, their vehicle, and exactly what had occurred. Within maybe 10 minutes, 2 police officers arrived, followed shortly by the security guard who had been making his way over when the SUV took off. Officer Martinez and Officer Chen were both really thorough, taking down every detail I could remember. The hoodie guy's gravelly voice, the baseball cap guy's smooth way of talking, the black SUV with what I thought was a dented rear bumper, even the fact that the box they wanted help with had looked suspiciously light and easy to handle. They walked me through the timeline multiple times, and I appreciated that they never made me feel like I was overreacting or being dramatic. Officer Chen mentioned that they'd been getting more reports lately of suspicious activity in various parking lots around town, and they were glad I'd trusted my instincts and made noise instead of going along with what the men wanted. What really shook me was what Officer Martinez told me about 20 minutes into giving my statement. He'd been on his radio with dispatch and other units, and apparently there had been another incident just 3 days earlier at a different Walmart across town. A woman in her early 20s had been approached by 2 men matching the exact same description, using the same story about needing help loading something heavy into their vehicle. In that case, The woman had actually started walking toward their car to help before she got a bad feeling and changed her mind, running back into the store instead. The men had followed her partway before giving up and driving off, and she'd reported it but hadn't been able to get a license plate number. Officer Martinez said they were now treating this as a pattern, possibly connected to some recent reports of attempted abductions in the region, and they were going to be increasing patrols around local shopping centers, especially during evening hours when college students typically did their shopping. The officers stayed with me until I felt calm enough to drive home, and they followed me to my apartment complex to make sure I got there safely. Officer Chen gave me his card and told me to call immediately if I noticed anything suspicious or if I remembered any additional details about the incident. That night, I barely slept, replaying every moment in my mind and thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong if I'd been just a little more trusting, a little less aware of my surroundings. I kept imagining what would have happened if I'd walked over to help with that box, or if I hadn't screamed when baseball cap guy grabbed my arm, or if there hadn't been other people around to witness what was happening. The whole experience made me realize how quickly a normal evening could turn into something dangerous, and how important it is to trust that gut feeling when something doesn't seem right, even if you can't put your finger on exactly what's wrong. So here's what happened to me last Tuesday, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm Marcus, 34, work construction as a foreman here in Phoenix. Just finished a brutal 12-hour shift pouring concrete for this new strip mall downtown when everything went sideways. All I wanted was to grab some groceries and a six-pack before heading home to my empty apartment and maybe catch the game. The Arizona heat was still crushing even at 7 p.m., had to be pushing 105 degrees. And I was exhausted, covered in concrete dust, honestly not thinking as sharp as I should have been. My truck's AC had been giving me trouble for weeks, making that weird grinding noise every time I turned it on, so I was actually looking forward to getting into that blessed Walmart air conditioning. Never thought a simple grocery run would turn into the most humiliating experience of my adult life. I parked my beat-up Ford F-150 near the back of the lot, away from the other cars like I always do since some idiot dinged my driver's side door last month. The parking lot was packed with the usual evening crowd, families with screaming kids, teenagers hanging around their cars with music blasting, elderly folks moving slow with their walkers. Just another typical Tuesday night at the busiest Walmart in the city. I grabbed my wallet from the center console, checked that I had my debit card, and started walking toward the entrance. The asphalt was so hot I could feel it through the thick soles of my work boots, and the smell of melting tar mixed with exhaust fumes was making me nauseous. I was maybe halfway to the entrance when this guy appeared out of nowhere, like he'd been waiting behind the cars or something. He looked to be in his early 40s, average height, wearing clean khakis and a polo shirt that screamed suburban dad. What struck me most was how perfectly ordinary he appeared. Brown hair with just a touch of gray at the temples, glasses that looked expensive, wedding ring on his finger. He was carrying this huge box, had to be at least 3 feet long and pretty heavy based on how he was struggling with it. The box was taped shut with that clear packing tape, and I could see it was from some electronics store based on the logo partially visible on one side. Guy looked genuinely stressed, kept shifting the weight of the box from one arm to the other, and when he spotted me, his face lit up like I was his salvation. "Excuse me, sir," he called out, his voice carrying this desperate edge that immediately made me want to help. "I know this is going to sound weird," he continued, setting the box down on the hot asphalt and wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "But I really need someone to help me return this thing inside. My wife bought it online for our anniversary, some kind of fancy sound system, but it's the wrong model and she's going to kill me if I don't get it returned today." He gestured helplessly at the box, then pulled out his wallet and showed me the receipt. Looked official enough, had the Walmart logo and everything. "Problem is, I forgot my ID at home like an idiot, and they won't let me return anything without it. Store policy, you know." The way he said it with this self-deprecating laugh made him seem so relatable. "Look, I'll give you $40 cash right now if you'll just walk in there and return this for me. I've got the receipt, everything's legit, just need someone with an ID to hand it over to customer service." $40 was $40, especially after the week I'd had. Our crew had been behind schedule all month, which meant longer hours and more stress, but the same pay. My rent was due in 3 days, and my checking account was looking pretty pathetic. The guy seemed genuine enough. Stressed husband trying to fix a mistake before his wife found out. We've all been there. He even showed me a photo on his phone of what looked like his family at some restaurant. Smiling wife and 2 kids. The whole suburban dream. "I totally get it if you think it's sketchy," he added quickly, pulling 2 crisp $20 bills from his wallet and holding them out. "But I'm desperate here, man. Been driving around for an hour trying to figure out what to do." The money looked real, and honestly, the whole situation seemed more embarrassing for him than anything else. Plus, what's the worst that could happen? I'd walk in, hand over a receipt in a box, walk out with store credit or cash. I looked at the receipt again, and everything appeared legit. Item number matched what was written on the side of the box. Date was from 3 days ago. Total came to $247.99. The guy was practically bouncing on his feet, clearly anxious to get this whole thing resolved. "You know what?" I said, taking the 20s and stuffing them into my back pocket. "Sure, I'll help you out. Been there myself with gift mistakes." His relief was immediate and seemed completely genuine. Shoulders sagged, he actually looked like he might tear up a little. "Oh man, thank you so much. You have no idea how much this helps," he said, bending down to pick up the box. It looked heavy, and when he handed it over to me, I could feel the weight of whatever electronics were inside shifting around. The box had been opened before. I could tell because the tape had been cut and reapplied, but that made sense if his wife had already looked at it. "Just go to customer service, show them your ID, hand over the receipt and the box," he explained as I adjusted my grip on the package. "They'll probably ask if anything's wrong with it. Just tell them it was the wrong model, happens all the time. Should take maybe 5 minutes max." He was already backing away toward the row of cars, pulling out his phone like he was going to call someone. "I'll wait right here by my car, silver Honda Accord over there." He pointed vaguely toward a section of the parking lot where I could see several silver cars. "Seriously, man, you're a lifesaver. My wife Jennifer is going to be so relieved when I tell her it's all sorted out." The whole interaction had taken maybe 3 minutes, and as I walked toward the Walmart entrance with this stranger's box under my arm, I was already thinking about what I'd spend that $40 on. Maybe grab some decent steaks instead of the cheap hamburger meat I'd been living on. The automatic doors whooshed open and that blast of cold air hit me like a wall. Such a relief after the scorching parking lot. The store was buzzing with typical evening activity. Families pushing overloaded carts, employees restocking shelves, the constant beeping of checkout scanners. I made my way toward the customer service counter, which was located near the front entrance next to the pharmacy. There was a short line, maybe 3 people ahead of me, so I got in queue and waited. The box wasn't too heavy, but it was awkward to hold, and I kept shifting it from one arm to the other while I waited. A middle-aged woman ahead of me was arguing about a return policy for some cleaning supplies, her voice getting louder and more agitated by the minute. Behind the counter, a young employee who couldn't have been more than 19 was trying to stay professional while clearly getting flustered. Just another normal evening at Walmart customer service. When my turn finally came, I stepped up to the counter and set the box down with a small thud. The employee, a kid named Tyler according to his name tag, looked up at me with tired eyes. "Hey there, what can I help you with tonight?" I handed him the receipt and pointed to the box. "Need to return this sound system, wrong model apparently." Tyler took the receipt and started scanning it into his computer, nodding along like this was the most routine thing in the world. "No problem, happens all the time." "Can I see your ID, please?" I pulled out my driver's license and handed it over, watching as he compared the name on my ID to something on his screen. Then his expression changed. The casual, bored look disappeared, replaced by confusion. then concern. He stared at his computer screen for what felt like forever, then looked back at my ID, then at the box. Sir, Tyler said, his voice suddenly uncertain. I'm going to need to get my manager. Can you wait here for just a second? Before I could even respond, he was walking quickly toward the back office area, leaving me standing there with the box and receipt on the counter. The people in line behind me were starting to get impatient, and I could feel their eyes on me. Something was clearly wrong, but I had no idea what. Maybe there was an issue with the receipt, or the return policy had changed, or the computer system was down. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was starting to race through possibilities. Within 2 minutes, Tyler was back with an older woman who had "manager" embroidered on her blue vest. She looked at me with the kind of expression you give someone who's about to get very bad news, picked up the receipt, and started typing rapidly on the computer keyboard. "Sir, I'm Linda, the evening manager," she said without looking up from the screen. "I need to ask you some questions about this return. Where did you purchase this item?" The question caught me completely off guard. I pointed to the receipt. "Well, here, that's a Walmart receipt, right?" She nodded slowly, still typing. "When did you purchase it?" Now I was getting nervous. 3 days ago, according to the receipt." Linda finally looked up at me, and her expression was all business. "Can you tell me what method of payment you used?" I stared at her blankly. How was I supposed to know that? I'm not sure, cash maybe?" She exchanged a look with Tyler that made my stomach start churning. "Sir, this item was reported stolen from our electronics department yesterday morning. The serial number matches exactly." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Stolen? What the hell was she talking about? "There has to be some mistake," I said, my voice coming out higher than normal. "A guy in the parking lot asked me to return this for him, said his wife bought the wrong model. He gave me $40 in the receipt." Linda's expression grew even more serious. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while I call security. This is a very serious matter." She motioned for me to move away from the counter, and suddenly Tyler was there, gently but firmly guiding me toward a small office area near the customer service desk. My mind was reeling. How could this be happening? The receipt looked real, the guy seemed legitimate. Everything about the situation had appeared normal. But as I stood there watching Linda make phone calls, the horrible reality started sinking in. I'd been set up, used, made into an unwitting accomplice in some kind of theft scheme that I didn't even understand. Security arrived within minutes. 2 guys in uniform who looked like they meant business. They weren't rough with me, but they made it clear I wasn't going anywhere until this got sorted out. Linda explained the situation while I stood there feeling like the biggest idiot in Arizona. They had me give a statement about everything that happened in the parking lot, describing the man who'd approached me in as much detail as I could remember. Then came the part that really made me want to disappear into the floor. They wanted to review the security footage. We all crowded into a small office behind customer service where Linda pulled up the parking lot cameras on her computer. What we saw made my skin crawl. There was the guy, clear as day, approaching me with his box and his sob story. But that wasn't the worst part. As Linda scrolled through the footage from previous days, we saw the same man approaching different people in the parking lot with the same box, the same desperate routine. 3 other people over the past week had fallen for the exact same scam I'd just walked into. The police showed up about 20 minutes later, and I had to give another statement, this time official. Officer Rodriguez was actually pretty understanding once he heard the whole story and saw the security footage. "You're not the first person this has happened to," he told me. "These return scams are getting more sophisticated. The guy probably stole the merchandise, created a fake receipt, then uses innocent people to try and return it for cash." He explained that I wasn't going to be charged with anything since it was clear I had no knowledge of the theft, but I'd need to be available if they caught the guy and needed me to testify. By the time everything was sorted out and I was finally allowed to leave, it was almost 10 p.m. 3 hours of my life wasted, my $40 confiscated as evidence. and the most humiliating experience I'd had since high school. As I walked back through that parking lot toward my truck, I scanned every silver car I passed, knowing full well that suburban dad with his perfect story was long gone. Tuesday evenings were always reserved for grocery shopping. After 8 hours of staring at spreadsheets at the accounting firm where I worked, the routine of pushing a cart through Walmart's fluorescent-lit aisles actually felt therapeutic. I'm Danielle, 38, and I'd been following this same pattern for the past 3 years since my divorce. Park near the garden center, grab a cart, start with produce, work my way through to frozen foods. The store near Highway 169 in Minneapolis was usually busy around 6 p.m., but manageable. That particular evening in early October, the air had that crisp fall feeling that made me grateful for my cardigan. I remember humming along to whatever pop song was playing overhead as I squeezed avocados, completely unaware that my predictable routine had caught someone's attention. The produce section was where he first approached me. I was comparing prices on bagged salads when I heard my name. Danielle, not a question, just a statement. I turned around to see a man standing about 3 feet away, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woody and too strong. He looked to be in his early 40s, average height, wearing a faded Twins baseball cap and a gray hoodie. His face seemed vaguely familiar in that way where you think maybe you've seen someone at a gas station or in line at Starbucks. He had pale blue eyes that didn't quite focus on mine, like he was looking at something just past my ear. I smiled politely, the way you do when you can't place someone but don't want to be rude. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" I asked, shifting my weight and gripping the cart handle a little tighter. He tilted his head slightly, and his lips curved into this small smile that made my chest feel tight. "Danielle, you don't remember me." His voice was soft, almost disappointed. He took a step closer, and I noticed his sneakers were pristine white like they'd just come out of the box. "I really like when you wear your hair like that," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward my ponytail. "The braid on Thursdays is nice too, but this suits you better." My mind raced, trying to figure out how this stranger knew about my Thursday braid, the one I always did for our weekly team meetings. I managed to mumble something about being in a hurry and turned my cart toward the deli section, walking faster than necessary. My heart was hammering, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he worked in my building. Maybe he was just socially awkward. The deli counter had a small line, which normally would have annoyed me, but right then I was grateful for the presence of other people. I pretended to study the menu board while stealing glances behind me. No sign of him. The teenager behind the counter called my number, and I ordered a pound of turkey, trying to steady my breathing. Just some weird guy, I told myself. Minneapolis was full of oddballs, but as I waited for my order, I couldn't stop thinking about how he'd said my name, like he'd been practicing it. 10 minutes later, I was in the cereal aisle, debating between granola and Special K when I saw him again. He was at the far end of the aisle, holding a box of Frosted Flakes but not really looking at it. His eyes were on me. This time he didn't approach, just stood there watching. I abandoned my cereal mission and headed for the pharmacy section, taking a circuitous route through automotive and sporting goods. My cart had maybe 5 items in it, nowhere near my usual weekly haul, but I was starting to think about leaving. The store suddenly felt too big and too empty at the same time. Those overhead lights that usually didn't bother me seemed harsh and exposing, like being on stage. The pharmacy section was busier, with people waiting for prescriptions and browsing cold medicine. I ducked into the shampoo aisle, pretending to read labels while trying to calm down. That's when I heard the squeak of cartwheels stopping right behind mine. I didn't have to turn around to know it was him. That cologne was unmistakable. Danielle. There it was again, my name in his mouth like a piece of candy he was savoring. "You use the lavender shampoo, don't you? I can smell it sometimes when you walk past." My throat constricted. Walk past where? I grabbed the nearest bottle without looking and practically threw it in my cart. then spun around to face him. Up close, I noticed more details. A small scar through his left eyebrow, perfectly trimmed fingernails, a gold watch that looked expensive. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you need to stop following me," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. He blinked slowly, like a cat, and that little smile appeared again. "Following you? Danielle, we're just shopping in the same store. Don't you think you're being a little paranoid?" The way he said paranoid made it sound like an inside joke. He reached past me to grab a bottle of conditioner, his arm brushing mine, and I instinctively jerked away. "You know, stress isn't good for you," he continued conversationally. "Maybe you should try that meditation app you downloaded last month, the one with the British lady's voice." The bottle of shampoo slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a loud thud. How could he possibly know about that app? I'd only mentioned it to my sister during a phone call. I left the bottle on the floor and pushed my cart away as fast as I could without actually running. My mind was screaming at me to get out, but some stubborn part insisted I was being ridiculous, that there had to be an explanation. Maybe he worked for the app company? Maybe he'd overheard me talking about it somewhere? Even as I thought it, I knew I was grasping at straws. I made it to the front of the store and saw the long lines at checkout. The self-checkout area was closer and less crowded, but it was also more isolated, tucked into a corner. I chose a regular line behind a woman with 2 kids and a cart full of groceries, figuring there was safety in numbers and time to think. That's when I saw him for the 3rd time. He was in the next line over, just 2 people ahead of me, buying only 3 items: the Frosted Flakes, a package of zip ties, and a disposable camera. A disposable camera? Who even used those anymore? He wasn't looking at me this time, just calmly placing his items on the belt. But something about his posture told me he knew exactly where I was. The woman in front of me was digging through her purse for coupons. Her kids were arguing about candy, and all I could focus on was the back of his gray hoodie. The cashier handed him his receipt, and he finally turned, catching my eye. He winked, actually winked, and headed toward the exit. But instead of leaving, he stopped near the customer service desk, pretending to look at his phone. My turn came up faster than I wanted. The teenage cashier scanned my pathetic collection of items: turkey, shampoo, a bag of salad, yogurt, and a box of crackers I didn't even remember grabbing. "Did you find everything okay?" she asked in that automatic retail voice. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or grab her by the shoulders and ask if she'd seen that man before. Instead, I just nodded and fumbled for my credit card. My hands were trembling as I inserted the chip, and I kept glancing toward customer service. He was still there, leaning against the lottery ticket display, the receipt printed with agonizing slowness. As I grabbed my single bag, I made a decision. I wasn't going out the main exit. I'd go back through the store and leave through the garden center where I'd parked. The walk through the store felt endless. Past the Halloween decorations that had been up since August, through the pet supplies, around the wall of fish tanks. I kept checking behind me but didn't see him. The garden center was dim and mostly empty, just one employee watering the mums. The automatic doors opened to the parking lot and the cool October air hit my face like a blessing. My car was right where I'd left it. My familiar blue Honda with the coffee stain on the passenger seat and the dream catcher hanging from the mirror. A gift from my niece. I clicked the unlock button from 20 feet away and practically jogged to it. It wasn't until I was inside with the doors locked that I allowed myself to really breathe. In the rearview mirror, I could see the store entrance. No sign of Gray Hoodie Man. I sat there for a minute, letting the adrenaline settle, telling myself it was over. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my mirrors, taking random turns, doubling back once just to make sure no one was following. My apartment building's underground parking garage had never looked so welcoming. Inside my unit, I dead-bolted the door and put the chain on, something I rarely did. I dropped the Walmart bag on the counter and realized I was still wearing my work clothes, my blouse damp with nervous sweat. After changing into pajamas and pouring a very large glass of wine, I sat on my couch and tried to process what had happened. Should I call the police and say what? That a man talked to me in Walmart and knew things about me? They'd probably say he was just a stalker who'd found my social media. That thought made me grab my phone and check my privacy settings on everything. Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Everything was set to private, but I made them even tighter, then Googled myself to see what came up. Just my company bio and a few race results from a 5K I'd run 2 years ago. The next morning felt almost normal. I convinced myself I'd overreacted, that maybe the guy was just someone from my building or gym who had an awkward crush. I threw myself into work, staying late to finish a report that wasn't due for a week. By the time I got home Wednesday night, I'd almost managed to forget about the whole thing. I was heating up leftover Chinese food when my phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. Friend request. The name was generic, Robert Smith, and the profile was clearly new, created that day. But it was the profile picture that made me drop my phone. It was a photo taken in the Walmart parking lot. I could see the garden center entrance in the background, and in the foreground, slightly blurry but unmistakable, was my blue Honda. The timestamp showed it was taken Tuesday evening, right around the time I'd been sitting in my car thinking I was safe. I didn't sleep that night. I called in sick Thursday, something I never did, and spent the day installing new locks and a security camera system I ordered with overnight delivery. I filed a police report, showing them the Facebook profile, but the officer seemed skeptical. Could be anyone, he said. Maybe someone playing a prank. I wanted to scream at him about the meditation app and the shampoo and the way the man had said my name, but I knew how it would sound. By Friday, I was back at work, jumpy and exhausted, flinching every time someone said my name. I started shopping at a different grocery store, one nowhere near my usual routes. I changed my hair, wearing it down instead of in a ponytail. I downloaded a personal safety app and shared my location with my sister. For weeks, I looked for that gray hoodie everywhere I went. I never saw him again. The Facebook profile disappeared after a few days, and no new requests came. Eventually, life returned to something like normal, though I never went back to that Walmart. Sometimes I still wonder who he was, how he knew those things about me, what he wanted. But mostly, I'm just grateful that our strange encounter ended with nothing more than fear. Not everyone who meets a stranger who knows too much about them can say the same. Let me share what went down at my local Walmart last Tuesday afternoon. I'm Eric, 43, and I work as an electrician here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My wife Jennifer had texted me during lunch asking if I could grab some groceries on my way home since she was stuck in meetings all day. I usually avoid shopping on weekdays, but we needed milk, bread, and a few other basics. The store was surprisingly busy for a Tuesday around 3 p.m., with most of the regular checkout lanes closed and everyone funneling toward the self-checkout area. I grabbed what we needed and headed over there, already mentally preparing for the usual battle with those finicky machines that never seem to scan items properly on the first try. The self-checkout area was packed, with about 8 machines running and a line of people waiting their turn. I finally got to a machine near the end, the one closest to the exit doors. Started scanning my items. Milk went through fine, bread took 2 tries, and the bananas needed the produce code entered manually. While I was typing in the code, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A woman had approached from behind and was standing uncomfortably close to my left side. She looked to be in her early 30s, wearing a faded pink hoodie and jeans. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had this nervous energy about her, constantly shifting her weight from foot to foot. She was clutching a receipt in one hand and had a large canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. "Excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice pitched high with what sounded like genuine distress. "I just used the machine next to yours, and I think it charged me twice for everything. The screen froze when I was paying, and now my receipt shows double charges." She waved the receipt in front of me, but kept it moving so I couldn't actually read anything on it. Her eyes were darting between me, the machine, and the store entrance. I tried to get help from the attendant, but she said she couldn't do anything about refunds at the register. She told me I'd have to go to customer service, but the line there is insane, and I've got to pick up my daughter from daycare in 20 minutes. She paused, biting her lower lip, then continued. I know this is weird to ask, but could you help me figure out what happened? Maybe if we run your card through my transaction screen, it'll show you what went wrong. The way she said it set off every internal alarm I had. Run my card through her transaction screen? That made zero sense. These machines don't work that way. Once a transaction is complete, you can't just go back and review it, especially not with someone else's payment method. I've used self-checkout hundreds of times over the years, and there's no feature that lets you do what she was describing. Plus, her story kept shifting slightly. First, the machine froze, then it charged her twice. Then she needed my card to show me something. None of it added up. I looked at her more carefully. Despite claiming to be in a rush, she seemed prepared to stand there as long as it took to convince me. Her tote bag was positioned oddly, held open at the top like she was ready to drop something into it quickly. I appreciate you're having trouble, I said, keeping my tone polite but firm while continuing to scan my items. But I don't think my card would help with your situation. These machines don't let you review past transactions like that. I turned slightly away from her, hoping she'd take the hint, but she didn't move. Instead, she stepped even closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and way too strong. No, you don't understand, she insisted, her voice taking on a more urgent quality. The attendant showed me this special diagnostic mode. See, if you put your card in and press cancel 3 times, it brings up the transaction history for the machine. Then I can show you exactly where it went wrong. She was already reaching toward my machine's card reader, her fingers hovering near the slot like she was ready to guide my hand there. That's when I noticed something else strange. For someone who claimed to have just finished shopping, her tote bag looked awfully light. I could see inside it partially. There was a wallet, some crumpled papers, and what looked like a small electronic device I couldn't quite identify. No groceries. No shopping bags. Nothing you'd expect from someone who'd just been double charged for their purchases. And now that I really looked at her receipt, I realized she was holding it in a way that kept her thumb over most of the text. The paper itself looked worn, like it had been handled many times, not fresh from a printer. Look, I said more firmly, I need to finish checking out. The customer service desk is right over there. I pointed across the store. They'll help you sort this out properly. Her demeanor changed instantly. The nervous, helpless act dropped and her eyes hardened. Fine, she snapped. I was just trying to save us both some time. You could have helped me understand what happened, but whatever. She backed away, but not before I caught her glancing at my wallet as I pulled it out to get my debit card. She didn't head toward customer service like you'd expect someone with a real problem to do. Instead, she wandered over to another self-checkout machine where an older man was just starting to scan his items. I watched as she approached him with the exact same nervous energy, the same receipt clutched in her hand. Even from where I stood, I could hear her starting the same spiel about being double charged and needing help. I finished my transaction quickly, keeping one eye on her the whole time. The elderly man she'd approached seemed confused by her request, and I saw him shaking his head. She persisted for a moment, then moved on to a woman with 2 young kids who was struggling to manage her groceries and keep the children from running off. This time, the woman seemed more sympathetic, actually stopping what she was doing to listen. I grabbed my bags and started walking toward the exit, but something made me pause. Part of me wanted to warn the woman, but I also didn't want to cause a scene or be wrong about the situation. As I hesitated, a store employee in a yellow vest noticed the interaction and started walking over. The blonde woman saw him coming and quickly excused herself, heading not for the exit but deeper into the store, disappearing down one of the aisles. I left the store and loaded my groceries into my truck, but the whole encounter stuck with me. During the drive home, I kept thinking about that device I'd glimpsed in her bag. It had looked almost like a card skimmer, One of those things you hear about criminals putting on ATMs. But that didn't make sense. She hadn't actually touched my card or the machine's reader. Still, something about the whole thing felt wrong. I decided to keep an eye on my bank account just in case. When I got home, Jennifer was already there, having gotten out of her meetings early. I told her about the weird encounter while putting away the groceries. She agreed it sounded like some kind of scam attempt and suggested I check my account right away just to be safe. Everything looked normal, just the Walmart charge for $47.83, exactly what I'd paid. The rest of the evening went on as usual. We had dinner, watched some TV, and I forgot about the strange woman at Walmart. Around 9:30 that night, I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed with a text alert from my bank. Unusual activity detected on your debit card ending in 4829. Did you authorize a payment of $389 to tech deals online? My stomach sank. I immediately opened my banking app and saw 3 more pending charges. $199.50 to Digital Gaming Store, 5M6723, to Electronics Wholesale Hub, and $89.99 to something called Quick Ship Direct. All of them had been made within the last hour, all online purchases. I showed Jennifer, and she grabbed her laptop to help me deal with it. While she called the bank's fraud department, I tried to figure out how this had happened. I hadn't used my card anywhere else that day except Walmart, and I definitely hadn't shared my information with anyone. The bank's fraud department was helpful, but overwhelmed. Apparently, they'd been getting similar calls all evening. The representative immediately canceled my card and said they'd investigate the charges. She asked about my recent transactions, and when I mentioned the Walmart self-checkout, she paused. "Sir, did anyone approach you while you were using the self-checkout? Maybe asking for help or trying to get close to your transaction?" When I described the blonde woman and her story about being double-charged, the representative's tone changed. "We've had multiple reports today of fraudulent charges following interactions at that specific Walmart location. Can you remember if this person had any devices with them? Some criminals use portable skimmers that can read card information from a short distance, especially if they can get you to insert your card while they're nearby with the device activated." The next morning, I drove back to Walmart and asked to speak with security. The head of security, a guy named Robert, took me to a small office behind customer service. When I described the woman, he immediately pulled up footage from the previous day. "We've been tracking her for about a week now," he said, turning his monitor so I could see. "She shows up every few days, always with the same routine. Watch this." He played footage from different days, and there she was. Same pink hoodie, same tote bag, approaching different customers at self-checkout. We've had at least 12 people report fraudulent charges after interacting with her. She never actually buys anything, just walks around with that old receipt. He zoomed in on one frame where her tote bag was more visible. "See that device? We think it's a modified RFID reader. When people insert their cards to pay, if she's close enough and the device is positioned right, it can capture the card information." Robert explained that they'd been working with local police to catch her, but she was careful. She never stayed long, always left when employees approached, and seemed to know exactly where the camera blind spots were. "The scam is clever," he admitted. "She gets people to insert their cards multiple times by confusing them with that story about diagnostic mode or showing the transaction history. Each time you insert the card, it gives her device another chance to read it. Some of these portable skimmers can grab info from up to 3 feet away if the conditions are right." He showed me reports from other victims. All had similar stories of being approached while using self-checkout. All had fraudulent charges show up hours later. The police had set up a sting operation for later that week, hoping to catch her in the act. I got a call from the bank 3 days later. They'd reversed all the fraudulent charges and were sending me a new card with additional security features. The investigator told me they'd traced the fraudulent purchases to IP addresses associated with a larger theft ring operating across several states. My case, along with others from that Walmart, had helped them identify a pattern. About a week after that, I saw on the local news that police had arrested a woman at our Walmart for identity theft and fraud. The footage showed someone in a pink hoodie being led away in handcuffs. Robert from security called me later that day to confirm it was the same woman who'd approached me. They'd found multiple card-skimming devices in her possession and evidence linking her to over 50 cases of fraud in our area alone. She'd been doing this for months, moving between different stores, always using the same confused shopper routine. The small device in her tote bag could apparently capture card information through the electromagnetic field created when a card's chip was activated, but only if she could get close enough during the exact moment of the transaction. That's why she needed people to keep inserting their cards. It increased her chances of getting a clean read. The whole experience taught me to trust my instincts and never let strangers get involved with my financial transactions, no matter how convincing their story sounds. I needed something decent to wear for my cousin Vanessa's engagement party, and with only 4 days to find it, online shopping wasn't an option. I'm Mia, 26, and I work as a dental hygienist at Brookdale Dental downtown. That Tuesday had been particularly rough. 8 hours of cleanings, 2 difficult root canals, and a kid who bit me during his checkup. By 5:30 p.m., all I wanted was to go home, pour a glass of wine, and binge-watch something mindless on Netflix. But Vanessa's party was Saturday, and I had nothing appropriate in my closet. So I dragged myself to the Walmart on Harrison Boulevard, figuring I could find something affordable and be home within an hour. The parking lot looked almost abandoned compared to its usual chaos. Maybe 15 cars scattered across the massive space. I parked near the entrance, grabbed my purse, and headed inside, completely unaware that I was walking into a nightmare. Inside, the store felt different than usual. Quieter, almost hollow. The women's clothing section sprawled out to my right, racks of summer dresses and blouses arranged in neat rows under those harsh overhead lights. I grabbed a shopping basket and started browsing, picking up a navy blue dress that looked professional enough for Vanessa's country club venue. A few other items caught my eye: a floral skirt, a cream-colored blouse with pearl buttons, and a jumpsuit that I wasn't sure I could pull off but wanted to try anyway. The entire section was empty, except for an older woman examining clearance items near the back wall. She kept muttering to herself about prices while holding shirts up to the light, squinting at the fabric like she was looking for flaws. I navigated around her and made my way to the fitting rooms, my arms full of potential outfits. The fitting room area sat tucked into the back corner of the women's section, 6 individual stalls arranged in an L shape with a full-length mirror at the end of the hallway. No employee was stationed at the desk where they usually count your items and hand you a number. A handwritten sign taped to the counter read, "Please limit to 6 items. Honor system today," in blue marker. The hallway smelled like a mixture of new carpet and that distinct Walmart smell, kind of like plastic and industrial cleaner. I picked the middle stall on the left side, number 3, because the door was already half open and the light was on inside. The small space had hooks on 3 walls, a narrow bench attached to the back wall, and a mirror that took up most of the door. I hung my purse on one hook, my potential outfits on the others, and started with the navy dress. The dress fit better than expected, hitting just above my knees and hugging in all the right places without being too tight. I was admiring how it looked from different angles when I noticed the ceiling light flickering above me. Not a dramatic strobe effect, just a subtle dimming and brightening that made my reflection in the mirror seem to pulse. Fluorescent bulbs did that sometimes when they were about to burn out, so I didn't think much of it. I slipped out of the dress and reached for the floral skirt, pairing it with the cream blouse. The combination looked good but felt too casual for Vanessa's fancy party. As I was adjusting the blouse collar, something small and white drifted down onto my bare shoulder. I brushed it off, thinking it was a loose thread from one of the garments. But when I looked at my hand, I saw it was actually a small chunk of ceiling tile dust, gritty and chalky between my fingers. Looking up was a reflex, the same way you'd check for a leak if you felt a water drop. The ceiling tiles in the fitting room were those standard white squares you see everywhere, held in place by a metal grid. The one directly above me had a dark gap along one edge, maybe half an inch wide, like it had been pushed up and hadn't settled back properly. More dust particles were floating down through that gap, visible in the flickering light like tiny snowflakes. I stood there in my bra and the floral skirt, staring at that gap, when I saw something that made every muscle in my body go rigid. Two pale fingers appeared at the edge of the tile, gripping it from above. They moved slowly, deliberately, pulling the tile back another inch. Behind those fingers, barely visible in the darkness above, I could make out the bottom edge of someone's face, just a chin and mouth, nothing more. My scream came out before I could even process what I was seeing. It was one of those deep primal screams that starts in your stomach and tears through your throat. I yanked the fitting room door open so hard it slammed against the wall, and I ran out into the hallway wearing just my bra and that floral skirt. The older woman from the clearance section was suddenly there, her eyes wide with shock as I barreled past her. "There's someone in the ceiling," I kept screaming, pointing back at the fitting room. "Someone's up there, call security." My voice sounded hysterical even to my own ears, high-pitched and cracking. The woman fumbled with her phone while I pressed myself against the far wall, unable to stop staring at that fitting room door like whoever was up there might crawl out at any second. Within minutes, 2 security guards showed up, a younger guy named Connor with acne scars on his cheeks, and an older man whose name tag read Earl in faded letters. Earl had that seen-it-all expression that mall security guards perfect over the years, but even he looked concerned when I explained what happened. Connor handed me his jacket to cover myself, while Earl radioed for backup and the store manager. They cleared out the fitting room area, putting up yellow tape like it was a crime scene, which I guess it kind of was. Earl went into stall number 3 with a flashlight, and I watched him shine it up through that gap in the ceiling. His whole demeanor changed in an instant. "Holy shit," he muttered, then louder, "Connor, call the real cops. Now." The police arrived in force, 4 officers initially, then more as word spread about what they'd found. They evacuated the entire women's section and brought in a ladder. I sat on a bench near customer service, still wearing Connor's security jacket over my bra, watching officers disappear up into the ceiling one by one. Earl stayed with me, occasionally updating me on what was happening. The man they found up there was named Marcus Fitzgerald, 34 years old, unemployed, with a previous arrest for voyeurism at a gym in Phoenix. He'd been living in town for 3 months, and according to what the police pieced together, he'd been planning this for weeks. He'd studied the store layout, figured out the employee schedules, and identified a maintenance access panel in a storage room that led to the crawl space above the fitting rooms. That Tuesday, he'd entered the store when it opened at 7 a.m., slipped into that storage room during a shift change, and climbed up into the ceiling to wait. When they brought him down, I caught a glimpse of him being led away in handcuffs. Marcus was skinnier than I'd imagined, wearing dark clothes covered in insulation dust and cobwebs. His face had this blank expression, like he was bored or inconvenienced rather than caught committing a crime. The officers found his setup in the crawl space: a sleeping bag, water bottles, protein bars, a portable battery pack, and worst of all, a phone mounted on a small tripod, pointed down through a hole he drilled above fitting room 3. He had similar holes above stalls 2 and 4, each carefully positioned to give him a view of anyone changing. The detective who took my statement, a woman named Patricia Chen, told me they found over 400 videos on his phone dating back 3 weeks. 400 women and girls who thought they were alone, who had no idea someone was watching them in their most vulnerable moments. The store manager, a nervous man named Bradley who kept wiping sweat from his forehead, gave me a $500 gift card and had someone retrieve my clothes and purse from the fitting room. He apologized maybe 20 times in 10 minutes, mentioned corporate policy and safety inspections, and practically begged me not to sue. I wasn't even thinking about lawsuits at that point. I just wanted to go home and shower until my skin turned red. Detective Chen drove me home since I was too shaky to drive myself. During the ride, she explained that Marcus had likely chosen that particular Walmart because of its older building design. The crawl space was unusually large, meant to accommodate HVAC systems from the 1990s that had since been updated. He'd essentially found himself a hidden apartment above the fitting rooms, complete with enough space to lie down comfortably and move around without making noise. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every small sound in my apartment made me picture someone hiding above my bedroom ceiling, watching through cracks I'd never noticed before. I checked every vent, every light fixture, even pulled a chair into my closet to inspect the attic access panel I'd never paid attention to before. My roommate Sarah found me at 3 a.m. standing on the kitchen counter, shining a flashlight into the air vent above the stove. She made me tea and sat with me while I told her everything, her face growing paler with each detail. We ended up sleeping in the living room together, leaving all the lights on like little kids afraid of the dark. The next day, she helped me install new locks, a security system, and these motion sensor cameras that alert my phone if anything moves when I'm not home. It took months before I could use a public changing room again, and even now, I always look up first, checking every tile, every vent, every possible hiding spot. Marcus Fitzgerald pled guilty to multiple charges including voyeurism, criminal trespass, and possession of illegal recordings. He got 7 years in prison and will have to register as a sex offender for life. Detective Chen called to tell me when he was sentenced, and she mentioned that the investigation led to new security protocols at all Walmart stores in the region. They now do daily ceiling inspections and installed motion sensors in the crawl spaces. It doesn't undo what happened, doesn't erase the violation that all 400 of us experienced, but at least it's something. I ended up wearing an old dress to Vanessa's engagement party, one I'd worn to a dozen events before. She asked why I didn't get something new, and I just smiled and changed the subject. Some stories aren't meant for parties, aren't meant for casual conversation, but I share it online, in forums, anywhere someone might see it and think to look up the next time they're in a fitting room. Because predators like Marcus count on us not looking up, count on us assuming we're safe in those small private spaces. Now I know better, and I'll never stop checking. So I graduated high school last June, and like most kids my age, I was scrambling to find work for the summer before starting community college in the fall. My parents had been on my case about getting a job since March, constantly reminding me that money doesn't grow on trees and that I needed to learn responsibility. I spent weeks filling out applications online, McDonald's, Target, grocery stores, you name it. The rejections were piling up, and honestly, my confidence was pretty shot. Then one Tuesday morning in early July, I got an email that made my heart race. It was from Walmart, asking me to come in for an interview the next day at 2 p.m. I'd applied there weeks ago and completely forgotten about it. The email looked professional enough, had the Walmart logo, and even included specific details about what to bring. My mom was thrilled when I told her, already talking about employee discounts and how this could be a great stepping stone. I spent the rest of that day researching common interview questions and picking out my best khakis and button-down shirt. The next morning, I woke up with butterflies dancing in my stomach. This was my first real job interview, and I wanted to make a good impression. I practiced my handshake in the mirror, rehearsed answers about my strengths and weaknesses, and even looked up the store manager's name online, though I couldn't find much information. My dad drove me there early, giving me a pep talk about eye contact and speaking clearly. The Walmart was busy as usual, with cars filling up the massive parking lot and people pushing carts full of groceries toward their vehicles. I walked through the automatic doors with my folder of documents, resume, references, social security card, the works. The greeter, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled at me warmly. I told her I was there for an interview, and she directed me to customer service. But when I got there and explained why I was there, the young woman behind the counter looked confused. She called over her supervisor, who also seemed puzzled, and said she'd need to check with management. While I waited, standing awkwardly near the customer service desk, I noticed a man watching me from across the store. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a navy blue polo shirt and khakis that could pass for a manager's uniform. He had thinning brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and carried himself with the kind of authority you'd expect from someone in charge. After about 10 minutes of waiting, he approached me directly. "You must be Logan," he said, extending his hand with a firm grip. "I'm Dale Peterson, the store manager. Sorry for the confusion at customer service. They're still getting used to our new scheduling system." His explanation seemed reasonable enough, and I felt relieved that someone finally knew why I was there. He asked if I had my documents with me, and I showed him my folder. "Perfect," he said, glancing around the busy store. "You know, we're doing some renovations in the back office area today, and it's pretty noisy and chaotic in there. Would you mind if we conducted the interview in my vehicle? I've got a comfortable setup, and we'll be able to talk without all the distractions." The request struck me as odd immediately. Every job interview I'd ever heard about took place in an office, a conference room, or at least somewhere inside the business. My mom had always told me to trust my instincts, and something about this whole situation felt wrong. Dale seemed to notice my hesitation and quickly added, "I know it's unconventional, but with the construction noise and customers constantly interrupting, it's really the best option we have today. It'll just take 15 minutes, and then I can show you around the store afterward." He gestured toward the parking lot, and I could see a large white van parked in one of the far corners, away from most of the other vehicles. The van looked clean and well-maintained, but it definitely wasn't what I'd consider a typical manager's vehicle. Most of the employees I'd seen drove regular cars or small trucks. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Maybe this was normal for some companies? Maybe they really were doing renovations? But every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't right. I thought about all the safety talks my parents had given me over the years, all the news stories about people who trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. "You know what, Mr. Peterson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and polite. "I really appreciate the opportunity, but I'd prefer to wait until the renovations are finished so we can do this properly inside the store. Maybe we could reschedule for later this week?" His friendly demeanor shifted slightly, and I caught a flash of irritation in his eyes before he quickly covered it with another smile. "Oh, that's really not necessary," he insisted, his tone becoming more pressing. "Like I said, it'll only take a few minutes, and I have other interviews scheduled for the rest of the week. This is really the only time slot I have available." He started walking toward the parking lot, clearly expecting me to follow, but every fiber of my being was telling me to stay put. I'd watched enough crime documentaries with my mom to know that predators often use job offers as bait, especially targeting young people who were desperate for work. The more he pushed, the more convinced I became that this wasn't legitimate. "I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable with that," I said firmly. "If this is how Walmart conducts interviews, then maybe this isn't the right fit for me." His mask slipped completely then, and for just a second, I saw something cold and calculating in his expression before he caught himself. Dale's whole demeanor changed after that. The fake friendliness evaporated, and he became almost businesslike in his dismissal. "Well, that's your choice," he said curtly. "But I should let you know that we take initiative and flexibility very seriously here. Candidates who can't adapt to our procedures usually aren't a good match for our company culture." He was trying to make me feel like I was blowing a real opportunity, but I stood my ground. "I understand," I replied, "but I'd still prefer to do this the traditional way." He shrugged and walked away without another word, heading straight toward that white van. I watched him from the store entrance, and what I saw next confirmed every suspicion I'd had. He didn't get into the van and leave like you'd expect someone to do after a failed interview. Instead, he sat in the driver's seat for about 20 minutes, just watching the parking lot. I could see him scanning the area, and at one point, he even got out and approached a young woman who was walking toward the store entrance. She seemed to listen to him for a moment before shaking her head and hurrying inside. That's when I knew for certain that something was very wrong with this whole situation. I went back to customer service and asked to speak with the actual store manager. The supervisor from earlier came out, and when I explained what had just happened, her face went completely pale. "Sir, I need to tell you something important," she said, lowering her voice. "We don't have anyone named Dale Peterson working here, and we definitely don't conduct interviews in the parking lot, ever." She immediately called security and asked me to describe the man in detail. While we waited for the security guard, she pulled up the store's hiring system on her computer. "We don't even have any interviews scheduled for today," she confirmed. "And all of our legitimate communications come through our official hiring portal, not generic email addresses." The security guard, a middle-aged man named Frank, took down all the information and asked me to point out the van if it was still there. Unfortunately, by the time we got outside, Dale and his van were gone. Frank radioed to other security personnel in the area and took photos of where the van had been parked. He told me I'd done exactly the right thing by trusting my instincts and refusing to go with the man. The security guard asked me to wait while he checked the parking lot surveillance cameras. About 30 minutes later, he came back with some disturbing news. "This isn't the first time this week," Frank told me. "We've had at least 3 other reports of a man matching that description approaching young people in our parking lot with fake job interview stories." The cameras had captured Dale approaching different people over the past several days, always using the same basic script about being a manager and needing to conduct interviews away from the store. Most people had simply walked away or ignored him, but I wasn't the only one who had engaged with him long enough to get suspicious. Frank explained that they'd already filed reports with the police, but this was the first time someone had been able to provide such detailed information about the man's approach and appearance. "The detective working this case is going to want to talk to you," he said. "You might have just helped us catch this guy before he actually managed to hurt someone." The thought that I could have been in that van, miles away from safety, made my stomach twist into knots. I called my dad to pick me up, and while I waited, Frank showed me how to report the incident online and gave me a case number for reference. When my dad arrived, I could see the anger and concern warring on his face as I explained what had happened. He immediately wanted to drive around the area looking for the white van, but Frank advised against it. "Let the police handle this," he said. "We've got good footage, and now we have your detailed description. The best thing you can do is go home and wait for the detective to contact you." On the drive home, my dad kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably imagining all the terrible things that could have happened if I'd gotten into that van. "I'm proud of you for listening to your gut," he said finally. "A lot of kids your age might have gone along with it, especially if they really needed the job." That evening, Detective Sarah Williams called our house. She was part of a task force investigating similar incidents across 3 different counties. "What you experienced fits a pattern we've been tracking for about 2 months, she explained. "This individual has been targeting teenagers and young adults, always using job opportunities as bait. You're the first person who was able to give us such a comprehensive account of his methods." She scheduled a time for me to come in and give a formal statement, and also asked if I'd be willing to work with a sketch artist. The next morning, I found myself at the police station, working with a forensic artist named Janet, who specialized in these kinds of cases. She was incredibly patient as I tried to recall every detail of Dale's appearance, the exact shape of his glasses, the way his hair was parted, even small things like a tiny scar near his left temple that I'd noticed when he leaned in close. "You have an excellent memory," Janet told me as the sketch began to take shape. "Most people only remember general features, but you're giving me specific details that could really help identify this person." The finished sketch looked remarkably like the man I'd encountered, capturing that false friendliness in his expression that had made me so uncomfortable. Detective Williams explained that they would be distributing the sketch to local businesses, especially places where young people typically applied for jobs. "We're also working with Walmart's corporate security team," she added. "They're implementing additional measures to prevent this kind of impersonation at all their locations." I learned that the fake email I'd received had been sent from a spoofed address designed to look official, complete with stolen Walmart graphics and formatting. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to making a terrible mistake. The detective had mentioned that this predator had been active for months, which meant there might have been other victims who weren't as lucky as I was. I started paying more attention to local news, and sure enough, there were reports from neighboring towns about similar incidents. Some parents were coming forward with stories about their teenagers receiving suspicious job interview requests, always involving meetings in vehicles or isolated locations. The common thread was always young people who were actively job hunting and might be desperate enough to overlook red flags. My mom had started sharing my story with other parents in our neighborhood, turning it into a teaching moment about online safety and trusting instincts. The scary part, she told her book club, is that Logan almost fell for it. This man knew exactly how to target kids who really needed work. The incident made me realize how vulnerable young job seekers really are, especially those of us without much experience who might not recognize the warning signs of predatory behavior. About 3 weeks after my encounter, Detective Williams called with an update that sent chills down my spine. They had arrested a man matching Dale's description after he successfully lured a 19-year-old girl into his van outside a Target in the next county. Fortunately, she managed to escape when he stopped at a red light, the detective explained. But she was able to identify him from your sketch, and the vehicle description you provided helped us locate him. The man's real name was Kenneth Marsh, and he had a history of similar crimes dating back several years. When they searched his van, they found zip ties, duct tape, and other items that suggested his intentions went far beyond fake job interviews. Your decision to trust your instincts and your detailed report directly contributed to getting this dangerous individual off the streets, Detective Williams told me. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was mixed with horror at what could have happened to me and others if I'd made a different choice that day. Kenneth Marsh was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison on multiple charges, including attempted kidnapping, impersonation, and fraud. The detective told me that my testimony was crucial in establishing his pattern of behavior and helping other victims come forward. Working nights at Walmart isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills. My name's Nina, and for the past 3 years I've been part of the overnight cleaning crew at the Supercenter on Route 46. At 40, most people think I should have my life figured out. But after my divorce last year, this job became my lifeline. The pay isn't much, but the health benefits are decent. And honestly, I prefer the quiet solitude of an empty store to dealing with customers during the day. My shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And by now, I know every corner of that place like the back of my hand. The fluorescent lights hum differently in different sections. The freezer units make this specific clicking sound when they cycle on, and I can tell which shopping carts have wobbly wheels just by their squeaking patterns. That particular Tuesday night started like any other. October had brought an early chill to Pennsylvania, and I remember pulling my cardigan tighter as I walked from my beat-up Honda Civic to the employee entrance. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a few other overnight workers' cars scattered under the yellowish streetlights. Inside, the store had that familiar after-hours atmosphere, all the chaos of the day shift cleaned up and reset for tomorrow. The aisles were perfectly straight, the shelves restocked, and the only sounds were the gentle whirring of refrigeration units and the occasional beep from the self-checkout machines running their nightly diagnostics. My supervisor, Derek, gave me the usual rundown during our brief team meeting. Standard cleaning protocol: start with the customer restrooms, move to the break rooms, then tackle the employee areas before finishing with the main floor. The first few hours passed without incident. I worked methodically through my checklist, listening to a true crime podcast through one earbud, while keeping the other ear free to hear if anyone needed me. The customer restrooms were surprisingly clean that night, just the usual maintenance of restocking toilet paper, checking soap dispensers, and giving everything a thorough wipe down. The break room took longer because someone had apparently exploded a burrito in the microwave and never bothered cleaning it up. Classic day shift move. By 2:30 a.m. I was ahead of schedule and feeling pretty good about the night. The store felt peaceful in that way it only does in the deep hours when the world outside seems to pause. Even the usual sounds seemed muted, creating this cocoon of calm that I'd grown to appreciate during my months of overnight work. Around 2:45 a.m., I wheeled my cleaning cart toward the employee restroom near the back offices. This particular bathroom was tucked away in a corridor that employees use to access the break room, time clock, and management offices. During the day, it saw steady traffic, but at night, it was one of the quieter spots in the store. As I approached, I noticed the light was already on, which struck me as odd since we're pretty strict about turning off lights in unused areas to save on electricity. I figured one of my coworkers had used it earlier and simply forgotten to flip the switch. The heavy door was slightly ajar, and I could see the bright fluorescent glow spilling out into the dim hallway. I knocked gently, a habit I'd developed after accidentally walking in on a coworker once during my first week, and called out a soft, "Hello?" When no one responded, I pushed the door open with my shoulder while maneuvering the cleaning cart through the narrow doorway. That's when I saw her. A little girl, no older than 6, was sitting cross-legged on the cold tile floor right in the center of the restroom. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days, wearing a pink t-shirt with some cartoon character I didn't recognize and blue jeans that were too big for her small frame. Her tiny sneakers were untied, the laces trailing on the floor around her. What struck me most was how perfectly still she sat, like a statue, with her hands resting on her knees and her back straight as a board. She was staring directly at the door, directly at me, with these wide, unblinking blue eyes that seemed way too serious for a child her age. The fluorescent light above cast harsh shadows across her pale face, making her look almost ghostly against the white tiles. For a moment, I thought maybe I was seeing things, that the long hours and late nights had finally caught up with me. My heart started racing as the reality of the situation hit me. What was a child doing here at almost 3 a.m.? Where were her parents? How had she even gotten into the store, let alone into the employee-only section? The questions tumbled through my mind as I stood there, gripping the handle of my cleaning cart so tightly my knuckles turned white. The little girl didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge my obvious shock in any way. She just kept staring at me with those unnaturally still eyes, as if she was waiting for something. The silence in that small bathroom was deafening. I could hear my own breathing, the distant hum of the store's ventilation system, even the faint buzz of the fluorescent bulb overhead. But from her, nothing. No movement, no sound, no indication that she was even breathing. It was like looking at a photograph of a child rather than an actual living person. "Sweetie?" I finally managed to say, my voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "What are you doing here? Where are your mommy and daddy?" The words felt strange in my mouth, like I was talking to myself in an empty room. She didn't respond, didn't even tilt her head or change her expression, just continued that intense, unwavering stare that was starting to make my skin crawl. I took a small step into the bathroom, leaving my cart in the doorway, and tried again with a slightly louder voice. "Honey, are you okay? Are you lost?" The acoustics in that small space made my voice sound hollow and strange, bouncing off the tile walls in a way that seemed to emphasize the absolute silence coming from the child. I crouched down slightly, trying to get to her eye level, hoping to appear less intimidating. "My name is Nina. I work here. Can you tell me your name?" Still nothing. She just sat there like a porcelain doll, perfectly motionless except for those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. Then, without any warning or change in expression, she stood up. The movement was fluid and graceful, like she was floating rather than using her muscles to rise from the floor. She didn't use her hands to push herself up, didn't make any of the small adjustments or sounds that people naturally make when changing positions. One moment she was sitting, the next she was standing, still staring at me with that same intense gaze. My breath caught in my throat as she took a step toward me. Then another, her untied shoelaces making soft whisking sounds against the tile. I instinctively backed up, bumping into my cleaning cart and sending a bottle of disinfectant clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the bathroom like a gunshot, but the child didn't even flinch. She just kept walking toward me with measured, deliberate steps, her face completely blank except for those unnaturally bright eyes that never left mine for even a second. When she reached the doorway where I was standing, she simply walked past me. Not around me, not acknowledging my presence in any way, but past me like I was just another piece of furniture in her path. I could have reached out and touched her shoulder. She was that close. But something deep in my gut told me not to. As she passed, I caught a whiff of something strange. Not the typical smell of a child, not bubble bath or playground dirt, or even that slightly sour milk smell that kids sometimes have. Instead, there was this musty, stale odor, like old books left in a damp basement or clothes that had been stored in an attic for years. It was faint but unmistakable, and it made my stomach turn in a way I couldn't explain. The little girl stepped into the hallway and turned left, heading toward the back offices and storage areas. Her movements were still eerily smooth, like she was gliding rather than walking, and those untied shoelaces continued their soft whisking against the linoleum floor. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching her small figure disappear down the dim corridor. My logical mind was screaming at me to follow her, to make sure she was safe, to find out how she'd gotten into the store and get her back to her parents. But my body wouldn't move. Every instinct I had was telling me to stay put, to let her go, to pretend I'd never seen her at all. The rational part of my brain kept insisting that this was just a lost child, probably wandering around while her parent worked somewhere in the store, maybe a family member of one of the overnight stalkers. But the way she'd moved, the way she'd stared, that awful smell, none of it felt right. None of it felt normal. After what must have been 2 or 3 minutes, I finally forced myself to step into the hallway and look in the direction she'd gone. The corridor stretched about 50 feet before branching off toward different departments, lit by those same buzzing fluorescent strips that cast everything in harsh white light. But she was nowhere to be seen. I practically jogged toward the end of the hallway, my cleaning supplies rattling behind me as I pulled the cart along. When I reached the intersection, I looked left toward the electronics stockroom, right toward the grocery receiving area, and straight ahead toward the employee parking exit. All 3 directions were empty, just long stretches of industrial flooring under humming lights. How could she have disappeared so quickly? Even a running child couldn't have made it out of sight in the time it took me to gather my courage and follow. I called out softly, "Hello, little girl?" My voice echoed off the concrete walls and came back to me hollow and strange. The only response was the distant sound of a pallet jack being operated somewhere in the store and the constant electrical buzz of the overhead lighting. I stood there turning in slow circles, scanning every shadow and doorway, but there was absolutely no trace of her. It was like she'd simply evaporated into thin air, leaving behind only that lingering musty smell that seemed to cling to the inside of my nostrils. Panic started to set in as I realized I needed to report this immediately. A child loose in the store, especially at this hour, was a serious safety issue regardless of how she'd gotten there. I abandoned my cleaning cart and hurried toward the front of the store where I knew Derek would be working on inventory reports in the manager's office. My footsteps echoed loudly in the empty aisles as I half-walked, half-jogged past towering shelves of merchandise. The store felt different now, less peaceful and more ominous, like the shadows between the aisles might be hiding something I didn't want to see. When I reached the customer service area, I could see the light on in the office and Derek's familiar silhouette hunched over paperwork. I knocked on the doorframe and let myself in, probably looking as frantic as I felt. "Derek, we have a problem," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a child in the store. A little girl, maybe 6 years old. I found her in the employee restroom, and now I can't find her anywhere." He looked up from his papers with that expression supervisors get when they're not sure if they're dealing with a real emergency or just another weird overnight shift story. Derek immediately took it seriously, which I appreciated. He called for Marcus and Jennifer, the other two overnight workers, over the radio and asked them to meet us at the customer service desk. Within 5 minutes, we had assembled what felt like a search party in the eerily quiet store. I described the little girl in detail: the blonde hair, pink shirt, oversized jeans, untied sneakers, and explained exactly where I'd seen her and which direction she'd gone. Derek pulled up the security camera feeds on the monitor behind the customer service counter, and we spent the next 20 minutes reviewing footage from every angle in the back hallway area. We watched the timestamp tick from 2:40 a.m. onward, scanning for any sign of a small figure moving through the corridors. The cameras showed me approaching the employee restroom with my cart, disappearing inside for several minutes, then emerging and searching the hallways frantically. But there was no child. Not entering the restroom, not leaving it, not walking down any of the corridors. The cameras captured everything else perfectly: a moth fluttering around one of the lights, Derek walking to the break room earlier in the evening, even a paper towel that had blown across the floor from someone's cleaning cart. But no little girl. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances that I didn't like, the kind of look that suggested they thought I might be losing my mind. Derek kept his expression neutral, but I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes as we watched the footage for the third time. Maybe she came in earlier and the cameras missed it somehow, I insisted, though even as I said it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. These were high-quality security cameras designed to catch shoplifters and employee theft. Missing a child walking through the store would be nearly impossible. We decided to do a physical search anyway, splitting up to cover more ground. Derek took the electronics and automotive sections, Marcus headed to grocery and pharmacy, Jennifer covered clothing and home goods, and I went back to the employee areas where I'd seen her. We spent 45 minutes combing through every aisle, checking behind displays, looking in storage rooms, even calling out her name softly in case she was hiding somewhere. The store felt enormous during that search, full of dark corners and towering shelves that could easily conceal a small child. But we found nothing. No trace of her, no evidence she'd ever been there at all. When we regrouped at the customer service desk, the atmosphere was awkward and tense. Derek asked me to walk through the story one more time, which I did, trying to recall every detail exactly as it had happened. But even as I spoke, I could hear how crazy it sounded. A child sitting motionless on a bathroom floor, staring at nothing, then walking away and vanishing into thin air, while security cameras recorded everything except her presence. Marcus suggested maybe I'd been more tired than I realized, that the fluorescent lights in long hours could play tricks on your eyes. Jennifer nodded in agreement, mentioning that she'd once thought she saw a customer in the store during overnight hours, only to realize it was just the way shadows fell across a mannequin. Derek was more diplomatic, saying he'd file a report with corporate and check with the day shift to see if anyone was missing a child, but his tone suggested he was just going through the motions. I appreciated that he wasn't dismissing me outright, but I could tell he didn't really believe what I was telling them. Hell, if someone had told me the same story, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of uncomfortable silence and sideways glances from my coworkers. I went back to my cleaning routine, but my heart wasn't in it. Every time I approached a dark corner or empty room, I found myself hesitating, half expecting to see that little girl sitting there with her unnaturally still posture and piercing stare. The employee restroom where it all started felt different now. Colder somehow, despite the heating system working normally. When I finally finished cleaning it, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small, wet footprint on the tile floor, about the size a child's sneaker would make. It was near where she'd been sitting, already mostly dried but still faintly visible under the harsh fluorescent light. I stared at it for a long moment, wondering if it had been there when I first walked in, or if my mind was playing tricks on me again. By the time my shift ended at 6 a.m., I was exhausted and rattled, questioning everything I thought I'd seen. Derek said he'd follow up on the incident, but I could tell he'd already written it off as a case of overnight shift fatigue. As I walked to my car in the growing dawn light, I kept looking back at the store, half expecting to see a small figure watching me from one of the windows. But there was nothing there. Just the familiar bulk of the building against the pale morning sky, keeping its secrets locked away until the next night shift began.